A 5-star rating in the world of professional wrestling is something that many could only dream to achieve. And out of all the many star rating systems out there for the squared circle, there is but one in particular that stands out above the rest. But who is the man behind the famous star system that so many people hope to impress? Well, he's the topic of this episode, because today, Dave knows Dave Meltzer. Dave Meltzer is the famed editor of the Wrestling Observer newsletter, and even though he is not an employee of any major wrestling promotion, he still has managed to achieve a remarkable amount of notoriety and respect among the wrestling industry and wrestling industry professionals. And this is all the more impressive when you remember just how inclusive and secretive the wrestling business actually is. But how did this all happen? Well, let's just start at the beginning. Dave Meltzer was first struck by the wrestling bug at the age of 9. Then amazingly, way before the Wrestling Observer, at the tender age of only 10, he began his journey into sports entertainment journalism. Meltzer began writing and publishing newsletters that would be endorsed by the fan club sections of certain wrestling magazines. Now, even as a child, Meltzer wanted a journalistic approach for wrestling professionals and a way to keep fans informed. His system was simple. Readers would send him a quarter and he would send them a copy of his latest newsletter. It was a simple yet effective publication. Then as a teenager, he began attending shows, but he also began to notice that as exciting and dramatic as the scripted on-camera action was, the real-life underbelly of pro wrestling was equally captivating, if not even more so. Meltzer then attended college where he would earn a degree in journalism. During this time, Meltzer began tape trading, which is something that many wrestling fans had to do back then in order to watch a lot of wrestling that they had no other means of seeing. See, you kids have no idea how lucky you have it these days. And while maintaining this tape trading list, he would occasionally slip in additional tidbits such as match results and even wrestling news. The goal was to keep his college friends in on everything, especially since wrestling magazines at the time were primarily catering to children. And during the territory days, pulling info was the only way that many fans had to find out everything that was going on in other parts of the country and even beyond. Now this all led to Meltzer founding The Observer, a monthly newsletter for wrestling fans. After graduating college, Meltzer began working for newspapers, but still kept The Observer running as his side hobby. A guy named Dave producing wrestling-related content as his side hustle while maintaining various jobs in the journalism field? Interesting. Anyway, the early publications of The Observer were sometimes a crude endeavor, being nothing more than typed words on legal paper which sometimes had to be corrected by hand. Then in the mid-1980s, Meltzer contemplated calling it quits, looking to pursue other endeavors in sports journalism. And this was also exacerbated by the fact that he really didn't like the direction that pro wrestling was going in at the time, especially with the ever-rising dominance of Vince McMahon, Hulkamania, and the WWF. He bemoaned the limited movesets and the questionable physiques that had become the norm for mainstream wrestling, and his interest just began to wane. However, there was apparently enough demand for The Observer to live on. He decided to pull a total about-face and to go full-time with it instead. The Observer was now a weekly publication. Meltzer also began attending major shows, traveling as far away as Japan. He can even be spotted at the Chi-Town Rumble in 1989. And in the pages of the Wrestling Observer, Meltzer would analyze wrestler contracts, he would break down the specifics of individual matches, and he would begin speaking out on steroid use in the industry, especially after seeing firsthand the toll that it was taking on the lives of many that he considered to be friends. Meltzer left no stone unturned, and many people hated him for it. He was becoming known among people in the industry, and there were those who just couldn't stand him for exposing the business and revealing things like salary details to the public, which some wrestlers just didn't want getting out. Not only did they feel that it was their own private business, but it could also lead to problems between other wrestlers. And of course, Vince McMahon himself was not a fan at this time either. Vince just hated the amount of insider knowledge that Meltzer had and was sharing to the public. And McMahon especially hated how he didn't know who he could trust anymore. There would be important board meetings with only key members, and somehow the information from those meetings would end up in the pages of The Observer. And as we all know, Vince McMahon just can't stand anything that's beyond his control. However, not everyone felt the same way. There were many wrestlers that would pass around The Observer in the locker room and share articles that they thought were of particular interest to another wrestler. And some of them even kept their love for the newsletter a secret, subscribing under their birth name in order to maintain anonymity. However, Meltzer, of course, knew who they were all along and just kept it to himself. By the 1990s, it was clear that the Wrestling Observer newsletter was unstoppable, and eventually Vince McMahon himself saw that it was too. Meltzer was brought on as a wrestling columnist for the National Sports Daily newspaper. This gave Meltzer a ton of credit and officially put him on as a legitimate national journalist for wrestling. And following that, the Observer's subscribers skyrocketed. This kind of prestige meant that he could not be denied any longer. Vince McMahon then decided that instead of working against Meltzer, working with him would probably be the best plan of action. But this did not change the Observer's journalistic integrity, especially because the steroid trials were about to begin. Meltzer covered the happenings of the trials very intently, especially after losing many friends over steroid use. Now, during this crucial time, it was very important, possibly more so than ever before, that the Observer print as much of the truth as possible, even with McMahon's cooperation now beginning to back off. But as always was the case, Meltzer protected his sources, making sure that wrestlers and industry professionals knew that they could speak to him freely. And this is how Dave Meltzer's value to the business became more apparent than ever before. Because in December of 1993, Meltzer was being treated for a ruptured appendix that wasn't diagnosed in time and had caused a very serious abdominal inflammation that was potentially life-threatening. But Meltzer's fans had acquired a bit of his information-finding ability, because somehow the number to the hospital that was treating him got out, and wrestlers and wrestling personnel were calling the hospital non-stop just to wish him well. Meltzer's value to the community had proven to be tremendous. In an industry that was all about secrets and disinformation, one man had been there for over a decade, fueled by a genuine love for wrestling, to be the ear for so many to vent, to cry, and to confide all the darkest plights and pains that come from being in the wrestling business. And not only did Dave Meltzer publish these thoughts for the whole world to know, but he also protected, listened, and understood wrestlers in a way that no other fan had ever done before. Whether it was a small gripe about pay or a deep confession that a wrestler couldn't even tell his own wife, Meltzer was there as a judgment-free zone, a safe haven, and a voice for the voiceless. So with his life on the line, many wrestlers then realized just what Meltzer meant to them. And fortunately, Meltzer made a full recovery. And over 20 years later, he is still going strong. His star rating system has become an industry standard as a mark of excellence. The Wrestling Observer has moved far beyond typewriter ink and whiteout and has now moved online, and many in the business still proudly boast the praises of Meltzer if they are lucky enough to get it. Not to mention that many who used to be opposed to him have since come around to celebrate his contributions to the wrestling world, with even Vince McMahon himself holding Meltzer in such high regard that it has been said that wrestlers need to be wary of even merely offending Meltzer unless they want to feel the full wrath of Vince McMahon. And to close this episode, the name of this channel notwithstanding, the real truth is, as always, Dave Meltzer knows wrestling.